Shamil, thanks for coming along. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and
Sure.
obviously your fantastic restaurant as well.
That's very sweet of you to say. So I started a restaurant with my fellow partners a couple of years ago called Dishoom. It's in Covent Garden. I don't know if any of you have been there, but we took this whole idea of old cafes from Bombay, which are dying out, which were started by Iranian immigrants to Bombay in around the 1920s or 30s. And we've basically tried to... They've all disappeared, sadly, these cafes, and we've tried to recreate one in London and paid homage to that. And we're doing another one in Shoreditch, opening in a couple of weeks' time.
I think what's interesting about the restaurant is that Indian food is the most popular cuisine in the UK, isn't it? It's more popular than pizza, it's more popular
Indeed,
than
yeah.
Sunday roasts. But your idea of going for a curry is kind of stuck in a 70s time warp, isn't it? It's like the plastic palm trees, it's the sort of twangy music in the background, quite dark spaces.
I mean, that's probably harsh, but I mean, I'd say that Britain and India have such a long, familiar relationship, which has become slightly complacent. So the problem with long relationships is that you think you know about each other and you don't. And the curry house is a fine tradition, but it is a British tradition. And I think we wanted to go back to India and find something else which was, just said something else which defeated the cliches, which brought India alight in a new way.
And is Indian cuisine dynamic? Is it because European cuisine is changing all the time? New restaurants, new chefs, new typologies of food are emerging all the time. But our vision of Indian food is quite static, isn't it? But if you go to India, do you see the same kind of dishes that you get in everyday restaurants?
I suspect you do. In India, we're fascinated with the West. So we haven't had modernity and newness and West. So we love sushi and Thai food, and that counts as Western now. But we love all the stuff we haven't had. So there isn't as much innovation as you might think.
And tell us about this picture that you brought along then.
Well, this is, I don't know if any of you know this album, you might, but it's the picture of Miles Davis with his guys making Kinda Blue. And the chap at the piano is Bill Evans to the right. And then you've got John Coltrane and Cannibal Adderley. The reason I picked this photograph is this is an incredible example of art. I think that this is, for me, the best thing probably ever committed to vinyl. But Miles Davis had not shared any of the scores with the players until they turned up. And they turned up and they just played. And they recorded every single first take. It's miraculous. And Bill Evans actually wrote some sleeve notes afterwards, and he said that it was a bit like a form of Japanese art. There's a form of Japanese art where you have to draw with a black calligraphy pen on a very thin sheet, and you don't have a second chance. It's a spontaneous art. And when you listen to Kinda Blue, it feels very designed, very mellow, very cool, but it's completely spontaneous. I mean, it's really unbelievable. The other thing I love about Miles Davis is that he once said, it's not the notes you play, it's the notes you don't, which of course resonates with design. It resonates with food as well, and we think about that a lot with our food. Our food, I think, is a bit, this sounds terribly pretentious, I'm sorry, but the way Miles Davis thinks about music, there's a strong soloist and there's background stuff going on. It's not a symphony, it's not classical music. And you might have background ingredients, but the main ingredient shines through, and I think that's pretty important for our food. It's not creamy curry, it's sparse.
And what's this then? Is this a shot from one of the restaurants?
It is. So we did a pop-up, I think you may have seen it, last summer on the South Bank. And I included this photo because I think we all need to be a bit balmy, and I'll explain. The whole idea of the pop-up was if you take one of these old cafes and you were to walk it down to Bombay's Chowpatty Beach in 1965 and it were to take a mild acid trip, what would happen? And we created that, and we created it from recycled materials. You can see newspapers there. You can see an old freight pallet. But we built the whole thing on the South Bank out of completely recycled stuff. And this picture is one that I found in the thieves' market in Bombay. And what's great about it is that these guys were so serious back then in the 30s. They were trying to look so English, and yet here they are. And we've subverted them and had fun with them and played with the whole idea of London juxtaposed with Bombay. It's a great picture for me, which I think says, you've got to be a bit balmy as well. You can't always be straight-laced and earnest.
How important is design to a restaurant experience? Because I've been to India, and a lot of the best food you have in places that a designer hasn't been with 100 miles of the space.
Yeah.
I mean, they're pretty initially brash, bright, almost unhygienic places, but they produce this amazing food, and that sticks in your mind longer perhaps than the kind of super designer restaurant that you were taken to and told that was the hot place.
I think that's very fair, and I think in a way we maybe take that on and say that the very essence of what you're talking about, being in a place which feels undesigned, which takes you to Bombay. I mean, we try and create that here. We try and say, well, look, take you to Bombay. We're not trying to create something which is necessarily, posh and slick and designed, but it is trying to be a time and a place.
Tintin.
Yeah, Tintin. So he's a great favorite of mine. I guess for a couple of reasons. One is the graphics of Bande Dessinée, of Hergé, are just fantastic. So with a few simple lines, he can evoke, and you can see the pictures there, he can evoke such action and beauty in a way as well. And this is a scene, I think, from The Crab with the Golden Claws. These are canvases on my wall at home. And it's almost Hitchcock. You know, it gets this fantastic realism. The film recently I thought was very poor because there was so much leaping around and stuntery, which wasn't realistic. And in Tintin, it's really very realistic. I think the other thing about Tintin, too, is that he goes through life naive. He's wonderfully innocent. And I think we all should do that. We should all be a little more naive, a little more innocent. And I think that particularly when you're thinking about design and food, you should come at it fresh. Come at it with a wide-eyed attitude and see what you can see. It will be different.
We haven't seen any of your food yet, but this is another...
No, I've not really included any, yeah. So Caravaggio, this is my favorite painting anyway. And I think I love Caravaggio because he saw things so differently. And Caravaggio painted around the 16th century, late 16th century. And he came after the Renaissance and the Mannerists. And everything was very stylized, quite perfect, very ideal. And Caravaggio said, look at the world a little differently. And up on the picture, you can see that Jesus is not perfect. He doesn't have a beard. You can see that there are holes in the elbow of the disciple there. The fish is slightly tatty. The fruit is terrible. And he managed to see and say, actually, this is real. That this is how reality is. And if I maybe relate it back to what we're doing, but you've been to the first restaurant in Covent Garden. The first restaurant is a very idealized version of one of these cafes, but we spent a week with our designers recently, 6 or 7 months ago, looking for those Caravaggio-esque bits. So finding those parts of these old cafes which we could bring alive in a different venue. And I think this is again a bit pretentious, but I think we've moved from a very idealistic design to a much more realistic Caravaggio-esque design. So this is Mr. Kohinoor, who is one of these original cafe owners, and his family came from Iran to Bombay in the 1890s, I believe. And when you go and see him, he's a real character. And I'll come back to the point, but he goes, I think, to every single table, and he will fix you with a stare, and he'll say something like, "Do you know how old I am?" And of course, you don't really know what to say to that. This guy with big glasses, you can't see his glasses. And then he proceeds to tell you, he says, "I'm as old as this cafe." And again, you don't know what to say, but what's lovely about him is that it's a perfect union of history, family, heritage, food, love, and service. And it relates back to your point, which is that this is a food place which is undesigned, clearly, and he's very spontaneous, but he is inseparable from the cafe. I don't know the difference between him and the cafe. And he's a wonderful man, and I think he speaks to every single customer. But when you take a bite of the food, you're tasting the century of tradition and heritage and family. And it's just wonderful, which I think makes food much more than just food.
But there's an interesting paradox here, isn't there, that these cafes are dying out in Bombay.
Indeed.
Hopefully you'll quickly touch on the reasons, but you've managed to make a thriving restaurant business in London based on an idea that India is losing.
Yeah, I mean, India doesn't value its traditions as much. It's rushing headlong into modernity. Whereas over here, we do look backwards a bit more for meaning. And I think for us to almost pay homage to rescue this tradition of these old cafes is pretty precious. It's a good mission in life to start creating these slightly balmy old cafes in London.
And are they closing down because the people think they're old-fashioned? They'd rather be eating sushi. They'd rather be eating fast food.
To some extent, I mean, they're being replaced by Cafe Coffee Day, which is Bombay's equivalent of Starbucks. But I think more crucially, the children of the cafe owners don't want to be cafe owners. They want to be sensibly, bankers or accountants. So there is a kind of adverse trend there. And there's 20 or 30 left, and I suspect that these ones will stay. There were 400.
Do you think you'll ever open one at Dishoom in India?
People have asked us that, yeah. It's a difficult one. I mean, many people have said that. I don't think it would be a real Irani cafe, because we are one in London, and we have so much London baggage now. But it would be a fun thing to do.
Well, good luck with it.
Thank you.
And when does the Shoreditch restaurant open?
Shoreditch opens in a couple of weeks' time.
And tell us where it's going to be?
On Boundary Street, if you know that. It's opposite Albion and the Boundary Hotel. Lovely place.
Fantastic. Good luck with that. And thanks for coming so much today to share the story of the restaurant.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.